react. You whispering my name, thinking I won't be the same till fiction in a fact. See what you didn't know, bruises that I'll never show, slipping on your every jab. So tighten up your fist, step into the ring with this. I hope your mama's got your back. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, blowing the sound of my name in the crowd. You didn't bust. Oh, 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 oh. You didn't bust. Oh, 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 oh. Just 'cause I took a break, you're making a huge mistake, thinking you can take the throne. Look at you trembling, step into the lion's den. Bet you wish you stayed at home, begging for mercy underneath your breath when I ain't even sweating yet. My legend's written in the stone, yeah. Your crying age in defeat is now your only friend. Even your mama's gotta know. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, only the sound of my name in the crowd. You didn't bust. Oh, 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 oh. You didn't bust. Oh, 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 oh,
The U.S. Supreme Court declines to hear Donald Trump's appeal in the Mar-a-Lago case. North Korea has fired more than 170 shells into the buffer zone between them and South Korea, violating the terms of their ceasefire agreement. 5 people, including 1 police officer, are dead in a shooting in Raleigh, North Carolina, which the last we saw was actually still active. They had the shooter cornered and had a drone trying to talk to him. The Parkland shooter has gotten life in prison. They have been seeking the death penalty, and a number of people are frustrated with that, but that has also occurred today. And the January 6th committee subpoenas former President Donald Trump. So that should keep us all entertained for quite some time. On the Ukraine side, there's a lot going on. We have on Commander Lance McMillan. He's going to be joining us along with his Andrew. We're going to talk about that bridge explosion and a number of other things, including just how many people the Belarusian government is mobilizing now to add into the fray and attack, presumably, Ukraine. Well, let's get into it. See you in a minute.
Hi, this is Penn. Penn Jillette, Penn and Teller. Big guy does magic. Smaller guy next to me, he does magic too. He doesn't talk that much. Anyway, I wanted to welcome you to In Time. Welcome you all to In Time with Nick. Love you all. Peace. Go get him, Nick.
Hello, hello, and welcome everyone to In Time. To learn more about those stories, please join us on the Discord. We're following that and discussing those stories and more. Apologies for the jumpiness of the feed. We had to make some last-minute corrections before streaming today, and it may be I will try to work on that and see if I can improve that. So apologies there. And yes, it is true. When the credits are playing, the cameras are all hot, so I can see all of our guests and our hosts. And yes, at least 30% of them do dance to the intro. I'm not kidding, and I know which ones. I'm just not going to say right now. It's great blackmail material. McMillan, I'm not going to say whether he's one of them. Yes. So at any rate, thank you all for joining us.
Me dancing, Nick. You do not want me dancing.
Yeah, okay. I will take your word for that. I tell people the same thing. So thank you all for joining us. We covered the January 6th committee, what I think is going to be the last one, probably. I think they're done, but they've been on a charm offensive, and we've seen them, members of that committee now on Fox News, MSNBC, and the likes, and we'll be keeping up with all of that. It was an interesting go. At any rate, we're here to talk with Commander McMillan. Commander, thank you once again for joining us, and with me today is Zandering. So welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for coming.
Glad to be here again.
Oh,
I can see.
Yeah. Oh, you can see yourself. Sorry, I thought you were gonna. Yeah, you can see because the glasses. Yeah, I still remember. You missed it as Andering, but I was asking McMillan for potential names for new shows, and he said, "How about Waste of Time?" Yeah, I remember that. Depends on how often.
Right up my alley.
It depends on how often we have him as a guest.
Lost in Time?
Lost in Time, yeah. That'll be me in another year and a half, I think. Oh, dear Lord. So,
sorry, haven't got the time.
So, yeah. Oh, dear Lord.
Oh, I can go on all night.
I realized next time we do a new show, well, for Titan, we were going to have a new show called Hard Time. Hopefully that'll be Donald Trump without too much longer. But at any rate, so how have things been in general in Ukraine?
Well, the Ukrainian offensives, counteroffensives, I think is the official term that's being thrown out, are slowing down, but they're still making good progress. I think the Ukrainians have realized how to conduct a sustained offensive effort, even when the Russians are putting up stronger defensive. They're finding ways of just saying, okay, this is where the strong point is. Let's go around it. And then suddenly the Russians have no choice but to pull up stakes and run for the hills or face being caught in a pocket.
When the
they're
bridge
doing well there.
When the bridge was damaged, the Russians fired a number of missiles, and I want to ask you about that in a couple of minutes. But and a number of people were killed. They hit areas they haven't hit before. They hit Kyiv. What were the effects of that? Did it strike terror into Ukrainians' hearts? Do you think that was the goal? What's going on with that?
I think the goal is twofold. One, I think, is misguided, and it kind of reeks of people who are making decisions who don't really understand what the decisions are that they're making.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that if you look at the concept generically of strategic bombing, but more specifically what is called terror bombing, and I need to be clear to differentiate. I don't mean like terrorists bombing, but terror bombing is where you're trying to destroy enemy morale by bombing their cities and that kind of stuff. Terror bombing basically doesn't work. the threat of it may work, but the actual bombing doesn't. In fact, it almost produces the opposite of the intended effect, because it typically causes the target of the bombing to become more committed towards continuing the struggle, of not giving in and saying, if these bastards are going to do this to us, then obviously there's no reason to try to look for a negotiated settlement. They're bad guys. So I think that's part of what's going on, is that somebody who's making the decision of let's shoot all these missiles at effectively civilian targets doesn't understand that it's counterproductive to pursue this. The other side of it, and I go back to what we talked about last time, is I think a lot of what's really going on is the war is not being waged in Ukraine. The real war is being waged behind closed doors inside the Kremlin. And it's who's going to emerge out of this morass that they've waded deep into with their their life intact. So that they're all busily pointing the finger at it's his fault, it's his fault, it's his fault, in a giant circle, trying to find somebody who will take the blame. And it's like a game of chicken. The first person to blink loses the game.
Or I think you described it as a circular firing squad.
Yeah. And eventually it's going to happen that somebody's pushed over the brink and they make the jump, and then everybody jumps, and it's going to get bloody. So I think the firing of all these missiles at Ukrainian targets is really meant to find a way to provoke that reaction inside the Kremlin from various factions, to make them be the one to blink first. The nationalists want to go really big, not understanding that Russia's already gone in about as big as they can. The moderates are hoping saner minds will prevail, and everybody will say, okay, look, we've obviously lost this. We lost it a couple of weeks into the war, but we've dragged it on well past the point where it makes any difference to keep going. Let's end it. And then you've got Putin kind of caught in the middle between these two groups, and all he's trying to do is literally survive, because, as I've expressed previously, this really ends up in only one of two end games for him. Either he's quietly retired to an obscure dacha east of the Ural Mountains and fades from public memory, or he takes up permanent underground mushroom farming in the woods outside Moscow.
So it's been suggested the speed at which he replied. Now, first of all, is it true that most of these missile retaliation targets were in fact civilian? And my second question is, it seems like the targets had been picked well in advance, suggesting that maybe. Well, so did Putin know that the bridge was going to get blown up, or did how?
I think what you have is, when I was a fire support coordinator during my time in the Navy, one of the things you learned is how the process of target selection worked. And early on in a conflict, or even before the conflict starts, and you're just planning theoretical, this might be a conflict, you generate what is called a list of targets, and that's exactly what it is. It's an encyclopedic list of every possible thing that you think could be a worthwhile target. So it's crossroads, it's ammunition dumps, it's airfields, it's ports, bridges, etc., etc., etc. And each one of these individual targets on this list will also be subcategorized into various groupings. So there could be one of, these are crossroads in the northern sector of the front where we want to block these two highways. So you just call up that number and you get a list of 20 potential targets.
Okay.
And then your intel people and your targeting people will sit down and say, okay, these are the 3 best ones for us to shoot at right now. And what that process is you go from list of targets, which can be tens of thousands of potential targets, to a target list, which can literally change not just day to day, but hour by hour as the situation on the front changes and you're dynamically adjusting. That way, your pilots, flying air support missions, your artillery crew, your forward observers, etc., they don't have to carry around that phone book-sized list of targets. They only need a little sheet with the 20 targets that are likely to be used today.
The targets du jour.
No, that's exactly what it is.
All right. So now there's been a lot of speculation about what took the bridge down. Some people have speculated it was missiles. Car bomb has been put out there. Also, maybe explosives. Somebody came in and put explosives on the bridge. So if you have a minute, we would like to discuss with you what you think took it down and why.
Okay. I think it's a truck bomb. We have a fair amount of evidence that that's likely what it was. They actually know where the truck was loaded. They have tracked the truck as it made its trip through Bulgaria, through Turkey, and then up through the Caucasus states into Russia. And then they actually have footage of it going boom here on the bridge.
All right. So this is let's see. This is So we've got all sorts of images. What would you like to start with?
Okay, so this is where you'll see, I think, the truck will detonate. And just so everybody knows what we're talking about, you see kind of in mid-screen going away from the camera, there is a car and a truck, and the truck is the one that is the detonation device.
Now I assume it has to have
you almost have to go frame by frame, and you'll see it initiates the explosion from that one truck.
Yeah, we may not have the ability to get literally that frame. The explosion's much faster than 30.
I understand.
This was a suicide mission by the driver of the truck?
Well, we'll talk about that in a sec, okay? And pop goes the weasel.
Yeah, okay.
Now, it's what comes after that pop goes the weasel that people are saying is a giveaway that no, it has to be this or that or whatever. So if you look to the right of the outbound lane of the bridge, you'll see that it looks like there's a lot more flame and smoke on that side than the other side. Well, first off, the explosion, assuming that's where it detonates, is on the outbound or the far lane, not the center of the lane. So it's closer to that side. And so the explosion actually has to cross the other two lanes of traffic to be seen on the other side of the bridge. So that's something. The next thing that I think is pertinent is that when we start looking at the damage to the bridge after this shot, you will see that what happens is the bridge blows and fractures on that right side. So as that section of the bridge is starting to collapse, it's going to create an opening, and that's where a lot of the explosive force is going to be venting, as opposed to the other side where presumably the bridge is starting to rise, thus blocking the amount of stuff coming out to the left of the explosion.
And now there is a train on the left here. It's it's a tanker train. It's right on the left. It's elevated, and you can actually see it separately ignite right here. So there it goes. It ignited right before the blast front hits the camera. You can see the blast front hitting the camera. So we'll show that one more time now. It actually ignites here. So it looks to me so that this explosion could have ignited the tanker.
Right. I don't think the tanker itself, the train, is part of the explosion because it burns, but it doesn't. The blast isn't sufficient to damage that portion of the bridge. The bridge is still standing. The supports are still standing. What's even more noteworthy is some of the damage after the fact photos. You'll see that even the handrails along the walkways next to the bridge aren't blown out by an explosive force on the train. They're melted because of the intense fire from the gasoline in those tank cars, which catches fire and melts that portion of the bridge.
All right, so let's take a look at Yeah,
I was going to say another theory that's been put forward, and this isn't a great picture for it. Anyway, I think the argument that it's this one. The argument that the blast came from underneath the bridge, that it was either explosive charges that had been placed under the bridge or there was a boat that detonated under the bridge, I think that falls short for two reasons. Number one, look at where all the scorching is. It's on top of the bridge. Okay, that's where all the burn and blast damage that you can see is. And then look at the support piling right there, almost in the center, where you have the bridge sections that are jackknifed on top of it. If the blast had originated underneath the bridge, that support piling would be scorched and probably have suffered some sort of significant structural damage. You don't see anything of that. So, to my mind, that says there's no blast from underneath the bridge.
So
the next
bridge,
thing,
the road itself shielded that pylon from the blast.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, if you look at the two sections of the bridge here that are collapsed, the one on the right side is between two support pilings. Okay? So the blast was intense enough to fracture that portion of the bridge right in the middle of that section. The other side, if you go out, the one on the left of the support piling, that one simply sheared off at the next support piling and fell in the water. It doesn't show any blast damage on it. So again, to my thinking, that shows that you've got blast that occurs somewhere near the center of that one section, ruptures it, it collapses into the water, and then the nature of that force of it collapsing coupled with the blast overpressure from the explosion causes the other one side of that bridge to go into the water as well.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And so now jumping on an inference from that, if I'm looking at these trains here, I see what appears to be scoring, but it's actually not rounded. It's all just based on wherever they were on fire. So is it safe to say that that's really not explosion damage, that's fire damage from...
Right, and the key giveaway, I think, is that the tanker cars, the metal on those tank cars is not particularly thick. It's not tank armor or anything. It's, just slightly thicker sheet metal, maybe a quarter or half-inch thick steel. And they all look relatively intact. That none of them have been blown apart. They're definitely burned, they're damaged, but I don't see anything that, to me, looks like an explosive incident on that.
All right, so let's bring that down and then go to, let's see. So that's a side view, and you can see the scoring on the railway is matches up with these fires. So there doesn't appear to be anything separate.
Right.
And
So if you look, you'll see 4 columns of flame. Okay. If you look right in the center between the middle two, where presumably that was the main effect of the fire, look at the handrails from the safety walkway. They're not blown off. They're kind of drooping. That's a sign of heat fatigue that melted that metal and caused it to go down. So again, that, to my thinking, does not suggest an explosive force causing that to occur.
all right, so you think? Let's see here. Let's put this one up. This will be the last one. So, this you can see the that rail that you were talking about. You can see that really well up here. It looks intact. It's definitely sagging. They're melting.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah.
So that's why, to me, that says the incident with the tank cars is because the blast overpressure from the explosion on the road was sufficient to rupture some of the cars, and with the fireball being as big as it was, any fuel in those cars would have caught fire and started burning.
Do you think they knew that the tankers were there? They had been stopped. I don't know how long they'd been stopped. Do you know how long they'd been stopped, and was it just a happy coincidence, or do you think that was part of the target?
I honestly don't know. My supposition is it's a happy coincidence for 2 reasons. Number one, if we assume this is a truck bomb, and there's one thing we haven't talked about yet, and we'll discuss that in a minute. If this was a truck bomb, they had to know when to set it off. Okay? And how do you do that? You can't set a timer because you have no idea how long it's going to take for the truck to clear customs and get to this point on the bridge. So you have to have some way of tracking what's going on. The obvious way to do that is to have somebody observing. So did you have somebody else on the bridge watching with the little radio control to set it off? That's risky because it's just another element that can be compromised by somebody stopping and searching that vehicle and saying, hey, wait a minute, this isn't right, and it compromises the operation. To my thinking, the obvious way to have done this was to have had a GPS pinger on the truck that's basically being tracked. I mean, you can do this with your own cell phone. Somebody can follow you when you're driving on the road if they have the right code. So you just plug that in, you see where it is, when you know when it gets to the area of the bridge that you want to detonate on, and you just hit the trigger and pop goes the weasel. So I think that's what happened. Now, could they have done it via drone? Sure, but we know this is one of the most heavily defended from aerial operations section of the entire combat area. The Russians know this was a critical point, and they have lots of anti-aircraft systems. They probably have a 24-hour cap flying over the bridge to protect it, combat air patrol fighter jets. So probably not a drone because, again, you're tipping your hand. Probably not a boat because, again, you're potentially tipping your hand if a Russian naval vessel stops you to search your boat. Why have you been here for the past 12 hours? Again, I think it's all easiest done by a satellite connection. So that's how I think it probably went down. Now, you asked about the driver and whether this was a suicide run. We don't really know, but this was a guy who'd made this run into Russia, into the Crimea, over this bridge on several previous occasions. And my guess is what happened is, Ukrainian intelligence or special operations directorate or whatever you want to call it, figured out that we're going to use somebody who's a known commodity, has contacts in Russia, that his paperwork is good. We're going to have him pick up this trailer and drive it on in, and then we set it off. So the driver is, for lack of a better description, an unwitting suicide bomber.
Oh,
He doesn't know.
he's a casualty. He had no idea that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Collateral damage.
Yeah.
That would just ruin my day if somebody decided they were going to bomb the trailer I was picking up.
So since Azandring is a truck driver, how do you feel now, Azandring, about? Well, wait. Oh, what is this? Hold on. So Azandring, they want you to start picking up a load in Ukraine right now. What are your thoughts? Do you get hazard pay?
I've got a load of fresh fruit and vegetables going to Governor Abbott's pantry.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway.
I think I'm going to invest in a mirror and a bomb-sniffing dog.
Oh, shit. So the one we haven't talked about that I have seen a couple of people trying to suggest is this was a HIMARS strike.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's likely for a number of reasons.
Okay.
First off, if you look at where the front lines are currently, there is one or two variants of the HIMARS missile systems that can reach where the bridge is. To my understanding, we have not given those particular missile systems to the Ukrainians for just this kind of concern, which is that they might shoot at targets inside Russia proper, thereby escalating the war beyond the control that we want to have over how far the escalation is going. Now, I could be wrong. They could have given them those missiles, but even if they had, I still don't think they would use, or this would account for what happened here, because the missile in question, the explosives carried by that missile is a mere 220 pounds. And if you look at the damage done to that bridge, that's a hell of a lot more than 220 pounds of explosive. I know when I was in the Navy doing, as I said, fire support coordination and such, we didn't use 250-pound bombs to engage targets. They had them in the inventory, but they almost never used them. In fact, if you wanted them, they had to special order them and fly them to the site in order to be used, because the smallest standard bomb that was used was a 500. And typically, most of the time when you were dropping bombs, I'm talking aircraft, not missile, but when you were dropping bombs, 1,000 pounds was really about as low as anybody ever wanted to go, and typically they wanted to use a 1-ton, 2,000-pound bomb. So a 2,000-pounder I could see accounting for this kind of damage. A 200-pound bomb? Nah.
Well, and you also got to look at it from the kind of the keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
It's like what would have been the easiest thing to have pulled off? I mean, even if they did have the HIMARS system, it can be very difficult to hit something like a bridge.
Yes.
You typically need, if you want to hit that kind of accuracy, you're going to need somebody there with a laser to laze the target for, the missile to guide in on and actually hit that. And they do have, standoff distances, but it's so light.
That, I mean, typically those weapons. Explosion. Yeah, typically those weapons now are GPS guided, but.
I guess you could put a GPS mark, but I mean, you're still.
Well, yeah, but the issue is the circular error of probability is large enough that whether that missile hits the bridge where you wanted and does the damage at exactly the point you calculated that would collapse it, that's a real long stretch to make that happen.
Yeah, and people have been using truck bombs for how long?
Yeah, exactly. So I just, to my mind, it's one of those, keep it simple, stupid. This is the easiest, most surefire way of accomplishing this mission. Now, it's a one shot because at this point the Russians are going to, put all sorts of extraordinary security procedures in place to try to counter it.
But that's going to slow everything down too. The damage notwithstanding, is going to, now they have to examine everything that goes on there. They've got to have dogs. It's going to slow.
The backup on the bridge since this happened, and understand that the other side of the bridge wasn't damaged, so they still have that open.
Well, they have one was sagging. It was sagging a bit. They're having everyone drive on one side of the.
But they could use it. But the backup apparently is like 4 days wait to get across that bridge. And they aren't sending just a solid stream of trucks. They're sending one across at a time and then kind of waiting to make sure it doesn't shift. And okay, let's do the next one. So and they're driving at slower speeds to avoid any kind of, this was a brilliantly executed logistics strike, I think is the best way to say it.
Well, let me answer a
question. If you really wanted to screw with people, you drive out there and then stop.
Yeah.
And get shot. Yeah.
Probably, yes.
Yes, you can do that if you want. I have different ideas of fun on a Tuesday, but knock yourself out. So to answer a question in the live chat that we've heard before, how was there so many cameras catching this? So Russia's got a very unique phenomenon. They have a really bad problem with fraud. And people throw themselves in front of cars and then say they got hit. And you can find these on YouTube. They're hilarious. They're everywhere, where a car is literally stopped. A guy's just walking, sees the car and goes, oh, throws himself onto the hood and goes, and falls off.
I'm dying.
Yeah. And it's a huge market over there. It's a big deal that they do this all the time, so much so that basically everybody at this point has a camera. They do it in case of accidents. They do it mostly for insurance fraud. It is a cultural phenomenon. They all have cameras in their cars, dash cams. It's very difficult to find even a single Russian vehicle that does not have one.
Yeah, but I will point out the one where we see the explosion occurring, I don't think that's somebody's mounted on a car. I think that's a mast-mounted camera on the bridge that's for traffic monitoring or security or something. I think that's an installation, not a car-mounted one.
I think the one that we showed was some kind of cam on the bridge. You can see it's elevated and it gets hit by the blast wave and the camera shakes. It doesn't look like it's in a car. But, yeah. All right. So Belarus is mobilizing. I've heard all sorts of numbers, 50,000. Somebody had suggested 500,000. I don't know how many, but they're mobilizing, presumably to yes.
Let's stop and address one other giant gorilla in that particular room. For about the past month, Belarus has been emptying their armories and munitions depots and transferring all that stuff to the Russians. So if Belarus is actually mobilizing, what the hell are they going to equip their troops with? So this notion that, 500,000 Belarusians are going to mass on the border preparatory to a giant attack or something, I think is just beyond ludicrous. I think possibly some zeros got added. I think a standard size of a operational brigade group under the Belarusian slant, Russian slant Soviet model was about 5,000 men. So my guess is what they're doing is mobilizing a single brigade, which is going to go do some sort of demonstration exercise on the border to try to distract the Ukrainians and basically to placate Putin by saying, yes, we're doing all we can to help you in your struggle without really doing anything. The reality is, I think Lutsenko is having so many domestic problems right now. Mobilizing an army and sending him away leaves him with very little security of his own, and you might wake up to him being the next Ukraine.
Well, and if he, yeah, well, and if you give away as much of your weapons and ammo as you can afford to Russia and say I'm helping, now you've got a great excuse, right? You just sit there and say, "Oh, Putin,
yeah,
I'd love to join you, but you said you wanted our weapons. We gave you those. I can't. We're gonna, So it's All right. I think honestly, it reminds me. It's Trumpian. Trumpian is now a word. He just makes up numbers and he makes up things. This many ballots were there. This many people are, and it's sort of like, okay, we're sending in 500,000, 500,000 from Belarus.
It's a modern version. Yeah, it's a modern version of the Potemkin village.
You had told me that one, and we had spoken about it, but I don't think we actually discussed that on either in time or downtime. Would you please tell me the story of the Potemkin village?
So, I know I'm going to get it wrong. I think it's Catherine the Great when she was the Tsarina. But regardless, the issue, Potemkin was the Minister of the Interior, Minister of Finance, whatever, under this particular czar. And he had been given all this money to do these great civic improvement projects throughout Russia to turn Russia into a modern state. Now, understand this is back during the Enlightenment period, so it's really long ago. Anyway, like a good Russian corrupt official, Potemkin did what anybody would do in that position. He pocketed 99% of the money. And then, assuming it's Catherine, who's the one who's doing this, wakes up one day and says, I've been hearing so many great things about these improvements you've been making. I'd like to go visit these places. Oh, okay.
Oops.
So Potemkin basically buys a mobile village and hires a bunch of actors. And what happens is, if you're going from Village A to Village B today, when you leave Village A, all the actors take down the facade of the village, get in their train or their carts and race down the road to Village B site, which is literally not a village. It's just a wide spot in the road. And you build the new village, and the villagers come out and wave and cheer the czar as they go by, and the czars, the people they love me. I've done so many wonderful things. Look how wonderful these villages, they're so clean and beautiful. And they're literally just prop theater fronts with a bunch of paid actors going, yay for the czar. That's the concept of Potemkin village, and I think that's kind of what we're looking at here with this. Lutsenko is being told you need to do something, so, oh yes, master, I will build my Potemkin village on the Ukrainian border so that you will see I'm doing my best to support you.
Now, to me, that actually sounds like the most reasonable and likely thing, personally. After hearing everything, that really does sound like what's likely happening. The story that I was listening to earlier this morning, they did address the whole thing with Belarus emptying out pretty much all of its armory. Like, they don't really have much in the way of arms left.
Yeah.
Was that the troops weren't going to be equipped by Belarus. They were being sent in to bolster the Russian units, which ostensibly would have had all of the equipment that that Belarus gave up, and so that they would be equipped with the Russian units that they were being integrated into. And of course, when you look at all of the
let me get my large can of dubious paint. I can
Well, no. I'm sure they get.
Look at all the stuff.
No. They're being equipped with AK-47s, very lightly used, dropped only once.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And spray painted orange with thick, crusty orange paint. It may look like rust, but it's really paint. It's a special new kind of version of cosmoline that we put
it's
on
urban
these.
camouflage.
Yes, exactly. Oh, God. So, along
I do
those
think
lines, the next thing I think is worth mentioning, and I know I wrote this to you, but I wanted to mention it because I think other viewers will find this amusing. The Russians have announced that they are reopening the T-62 tank production lines. Now, to put this in context, the T-62 was a tank that was first introduced in 1961. The last T-62 rolled off the production lines in 1975, and the Russians basically removed them all from active service and put them in grand outdoor storage yards all across Russia, where they've been for the past almost 50 years. So the Russians are reopening the production line on a 50-year-old tank.
Well, and so
Why?
the numbers, just to put some context, the numbers is actually the essentially the model year. So the T-62 is 62. The T-72 is a famous one. The T-80s and the T-92s. I think it's a T-92. So which was made in T-90. Okay. Well, and that's actually what they've been using a lot of the T-90s, but they've been having a lot of issues with those. And those are the ones that with the Jack in the Box top. Is that the
right.
T-90?
The majority of the tanks that seem to be in use right now are T-72s. Now, the T-72 has been upgraded multiple times, kind of like our M1. I'm not trying to equate the two tanks, but we've done like 6 different upgrades to the M1 since it first got introduced. The Russians have done probably 12 to 15 different upgrade versions of the T-72. It's a proven design, it's reasonably effective, and it's cheap. That's why they do it. They have a limited number of T-7 or T-80s and even fewer T-90s. They also have a new one, which is the T-14. That's the Armata tank that everybody's talking about. And as far as I've been able to tell from the multiple sources I've checked, I think they built 14 or 15 of them, and that's it. And again, Potemkin Village. We need to show the Tsar how great the military is, so we take this brand new tank design and we would stage it in the parades. And that's one of the things they're finding is a lot of the tanks that are being captured at the front, it's literally a case of the odometers show that the thing hasn't been driven further than like 50 miles in its entire lifespan. So it rolled off the production floor, probably went to the Armed Forces Day parade in, Kiev, well, not Kiev, but, Moscow or Pskov or whatever, and then got put in a storage lot somewhere outside where it sat until they said, oh, we need to do this. In fact, we know from the old Soviet training model, all the tanks or vehicles that were assigned to various combat formations typically were kept in inactive storage. The troops did not train on those vehicles. There were special sets of training vehicles that everybody rotated through and used those. And those got all the wear and tear. They also got the majority of the maintenance in order to keep them running. While the brand new, only 50 miles on the odometer tanks sat out in a field for 20, 30, 40 years, rusting away.
So why are they going? Why not make something more modern? Why are they making T-62s?
Because the T-62 is the last tank that they produced that didn't have integrated computerized stuff on board it. So you can't build a T-72 because it has all these chips that have to be used for laser range finders, for gyro stabilization for the gun, etc., etc. So a T-62 is kind of a slightly upgraded version of a tank that was produced in 1945. That's kind of the model. It can't fire on the move. It has to stop, get stationary, and then the gunner locks onto the target and fires. I don't know if you've seen videos of it, but if you haven't, it's worth seeing of how a gyro-stabilized gun works. The Germans have probably the best ones, and they have these great joke videos where they put a flat little plate on the end of the gun barrel and put a beer stein filled with beer on it, and then drive through the obstacle course. And when they get to the end of the obstacle course, the crew's all shaken up inside. That beer hasn't spilled a single drop.
Probably that's where you're going to be riding. So is it because of the sanctions that they've been unable to manufacture the chips and put the so they the sanctions
no ability
are helping. Oh.
Yeah, the sanctions definitely have an effect. So it's like that's what
this
they're doing.
This is a prime time to lend. This is a prime time to.
Yeah. Go ahead.
This is Andrew.
This is a prime time to lend Ukraine about 4 AH-64s and just let them have fun, because the tanks not being able to fire while moving means they cannot hit an Apache helicopter.
Yep.
And the Apache was specifically designed to take out tanks.
Yep.
They would it would be just like a training run. It's like, ooh, let's just go kill that one. It's kind of like the videos from the Apache gunners.
You don't even need an Apache. You could do it with a Cobra, for God's sake.
Yeah, but the Apache would be so much funner. I mean, because they have all the video stuff on there, and you can see, when the first the liberation of Iraq, when they were taking out the tanks, or liberation of Kuwait, when they were taking out the tanks were running behind sand dunes to get away from the Apaches, and the Apaches could still see the tank right through the sand dune because of the heat signature, and they'd still fire right through the dang sand dune and hit the tank. And it was like, you can see, and they have it all on video, and it's just like wild to watch an Apache take out tanks.
Oh yeah.
Or send over some Warthogs. Those would be A-10s. Those would be really good because again, it cannot attack aircraft if it doesn't have a gyro gun. I mean, because it can't shoot.
I wanted to address a couple of things that came up in the
okay, let's do that in a sec. What I'd like to do, speaking of the chat, we did get a $5 super chat from the Sinister Porpoise. So let me do that one, and then please. So Sinister Porpoise for $5. Thank you, Sinister, once again for your support. We sincerely appreciate it. I must tell my professor that inductive proofs are invalid because of Hume. $2 plus 50 characters because needed the message size. Sinister, hit me up. I will totally back you on that. I am you know me and Hume. I'm a fanboy. So I will totally any argument. If it's a computer science professor, they got no chance. They got no chance. Thank you so much, Sinister, for your super chat. We really appreciate it. Thank you. All right. So speaking of chats in the live chat, and Kitty Mowdy is here. I don't know when Mowdy turned into a cat. I know he's a cult leader. I did not realize he was a feline. And Mr. Shadow Kitty, we're inundated today, and I know Sinister's going to let Athena off the hook. Athena tends to type on the no, Nick, please, no, sorry, I won't do Hume today. All right, so yes, what did you want to address, please, by all means, Commander?
Yeah, somebody was asking about the 1945 heritage, and I think if you look at what was at the end of World War II, the heavy tank they were producing was the JS-3. If you look at the JS-3, it transitions into the T-10. The T-10 then becomes the T-54, 55, and the T-62 is a successor to that one. It's not until you get to the T-64 that you get a really significant change to the concept of what they build their tanks. So you can directly see the lineage tracing through all those tanks to where it kind of stops the World War II concept and becomes something new at the T-62, T-64 breakpoint. Somebody also said or asked about, I thought that they were not opening the production lines, but they were using the production facility to modernize existing T-62s. That may well be the case. The article I read said they were starting the production line in addition to modernizing. Part of the problem being is that all the T-62s that have been sitting in those boneyards for the past 45 years, it's probably just as easy and in some ways faster to build a brand new tank than it is to try to get those old pieces of junk fixed. So I think it's kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
I imagine a lot of the tracks would have fused and fused to the wheels and all. I mean, it's just all the rubber. Anything that's rubber in there is gone. Gaskets, anything like that.
It's important to understand these things have literally not even had the engines turned over, let alone having been driven any distance. They've been sitting there, exposed to that wonderful Russian winter and all the rain and all the sun and everything, sitting in these dirt lots for 50 years almost. So, yeah, it's. I think it's a stretch to see that they're going to bring many of those back.
Speaking of the winter, we've discussed before that the winter is coming. We've spoken. You already have a very good insight into this. We also spoke with Operator Starsky, who basically said, "Look, we live here. All of us have winter clothing. We know how to survive the winters here, and we don't even need military winter clothing. We've got it, but we could just wear civilian winter clothing and be ready." The Russians haven't imported any of this stuff. They don't have it. They don't, so the Ukrainians are ostensibly already reasonably well prepared and preparing rapidly for winter. The Russians aren't. You've suggested on a couple of occasions that basically the line is going to come, if I understand correctly, that the front line is going to sort of just freeze in place and come to a standstill, and that there isn't going to be a lot of motion during the winter. So, at least that's my understanding. So I wanted to ask if that was the case. Are the Ukrainians sort of trying to beat the clock and get back as much as they can by then? Is winter sort of a hard stop and they just wait till spring? What are the Ukrainians doing now to prepare strategically for, strategically may not be, but the overall picture of what they're doing to prepare in terms of prosecuting the war for the winter, aside from obviously the clothing and such.
Okay, so let's talk the clothing and other similar winter preparation things. We know that a number of NATO countries, in fact, not just NATO countries, but countries that aren't in NATO yet, Finland, for example, are giving the Ukrainians 500,000 winter uniform sets. And that's the boots, winter cold pack boots, the socks, the camouflage, white camouflage uniforms, all of this stuff, sleeping bags. So the Ukrainians are going to be fairly well outfitted to deal with all the bad crap going on. Similarly, because of the logistics situation, we know that the Russians are going to have trouble supplying their guys with the right amounts of food even now. When it gets into winter, when you need to have more food to maintain body heat, they're going to be even more overtasked. They're going to be still foraging in areas of the countryside that have already been picked over pretty thoroughly. The Ukrainians are getting good levels of supply to their troops. They're well fed. The troops, many of them are saying, heck, I'm eating better now than I do in my civilian life. So I think there's going to be a definite quality of life morale situation that happens during the winter because of just that issue. As for the front, it's important to understand you end up with kind of 3 periods. So you get a rainy season in the late fall, early winter, and again in the early spring period where the ground becomes unusable. it turns into, knee-deep, thigh-deep mud. If you haven't seen pictures of the Eastern Front during World War II, go look it up. You'll see exactly the kind of stuff I'm talking about. And fighting will stop during those periods of time, which can last between 4 to 6 weeks typically. It's going to have slightly less impact now than it did back in World War II because there are a lot more paved roads. Back during that period, there was literally one and only one paved road in all of Russia that ran from Smolensk to Moscow. And it only had a thin layer of macadam on top of it. And after you drive a bunch of tanks on it, guess what happened to all that very thin macadam? It disappeared and became part of the mud. So they built real roads, but you're still confined to operating in a very narrow sector on that one road. You can't maneuver off on the ground. The ground at some point should, assuming the winter weather patterns haven't changed that significantly yet, should freeze. While that ground is frozen, you can still, to some extent, conduct mechanized operations. Wheeled operations become a lot more complicated than tracked operations. That's one of the big advantages a tracked vehicle has over a wheeled vehicle, is it can operate in unstable ground a lot better. So that's where having lots of the BMPs and tanks and that kind of stuff becomes useful. And guess which country has been getting more and more of those, and which country's been losing more and more of those. So I think what's going to happen is you will see small local gains by the Ukrainians, and they may at some point mount a significant winter offensive. I expect that probably before the end of the year, they will have taken or at least significantly reduced and encircled much of the Kherson bridgehead area. So they will have pushed the Russians to the eastern bank of the river. Up north, I think they're going to probably have to stop as the weather gets worse, simply because there's less off-road capability, or rather the road net in the area is less well developed, so sustaining a powerful, fast-moving offensive effort becomes difficult. But I do think that they will, definitely make some gains there. I would anticipate that probably by spring they will be in a position to launch an offensive and regain Severodonetsk and what was the other town? I can't remember. The ones that just before all this fighting in the north occurred that they were driven out of by the
Luhansk and
well, it's not Luhansk, it's some of the things.
Oh,
yeah.
So, Sister Porpoise brings up a good idea, and I think she's right on this, and so I'm going to propose. I think, with Xandering's permission, I think in time we'll in fact donate to the Russian military. I think it's kind of I feel kind of sad about what they're going through, so we will be donating 1,000 tank tops and 1,000 short shorts to the Ukrainian military to support their winter operations. Just a little thing from
I can
those
get behind that
time.
so long as they're. I can get behind that so long as they're pink, pastel blue, rainbow colored, and have the little triangle on them.
You added the frosting to the cake there, good sir. I think that's what we're going to do. So, with our blessing to the Russian military, it'll still probably be warmer than what they're going to be wearing. Have fun, folks. All right, is Andrew any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
The only thing is, of course, there's several sections of at least the U.S. population that are screaming about, oh my God, it's World War III and it's going to be World War III, and I think that's a little hasty to to say that, of course, none of the other world wars, right at the beginning, did they think they were in a world war, really. But I still hesitate to call it World War III, though. A couple of things that I do find a little disconcerting is that I don't see much in the way of any effort to de-escalate anything. So far, it seems like everybody is only interested in escalating, which doesn't bode well. But hopefully, we can get an end to this war somewhat quickly, preferably by a early retirement of Mr. Putin, and so we can put the all the rumors and fears of total nuclear annihilation, though I'm not sure why people would think that would be the worst thing ever. I would think dropping a couple of very, very high altitude nuclear blasts over, like, say, Kansas would be far more devastating than nuclear war. Well, at least far more suffering. Maybe not more devastating, but at least if they were to completely try and wipe out the United States with nuclear weapons, at least you wouldn't be alive to even know it happened. You may have a brief moment of going, what are those sounds? And then you would just be gone. Whereas they can do far more devastating things without ever actually striking anybody. So, I would really like to see a lot more efforts at de-escalation. And I'm torn because Ukraine has every right to be pissed off and say, hey, we're not taking this, we're not settling, we're not negotiating this. This is our land, and we did nothing to deserve being invaded. And this is the problem you have with nuclear armed countries deciding to go to war. There's always that threat of nuclear annihilation, and nobody wants that. So hopefully, I'm still very hopeful that we'll just get an early retirement for Mr. Putin, and we can stop with this insanity.
I agree with most of what you said. The only problem I see is that Putin potentially isn't the worst that could come out of this. If the ultra-nationalists get into power, they've been very open about the fact that, they fully want to use every weapon at Russia's disposal to end this confrontation with the West. They are definitely the kind of whack jobs who believe their own propaganda that somehow they will emerge triumphant. They don't care what the cost is going to be to their country or the globe or anybody. All they care about is themselves. So in some ways, Putin becomes kind of an insurance policy that the true lunatics don't take over the asylum.
Jesus.
Yeah.
So okay, and they haven't been deterred by seeing what's happened to Putin.
No, in fact, to them, they're starting to make comments, in back rooms that Putin is losing because he isn't being forceful enough.
Oh, dear Lord. I really thought Putin was the worst you could get.
I ain't saying he's great, but it's one of those, be careful what you ask for.
Yeah.
The whole the devil we know versus the devil we don't.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let me just
on that happy note.
Yeah, on that happy note. All right. Well, yeah. I've gotten the compliment before. People are like, Nick, you've got a great show. In Time is awesome, but oh my God, sometimes it's depressing. I know. It's next. We're going to go to.
Well, and you're getting it from like both sides here. The commander's like, hey, there's some ultranationalists in there that we really don't want to get into power because, they're actually wackadoodle enough to pull out all the stops and say, no, we're doing this. And I'm like, look, launching nuclear strikes against cities is not the worst thing they could do to us. And it's to start going through all of the different stuff that can be done. And you're like, okay, so now I got one person telling me that there's wackadoodles that are willing to actually do this, and then I got somebody else telling me, look, it's even worse than you think it is when it comes to what can be done. And, well, yeah, here's some buttercups, and just go have a lovely day in that meadow.
Well, on that note, we would like very much to encourage people. We get demonetized a lot for what we cover, so we'd like to encourage people to become a patron or become a member of the show, and we are now including around 30 milligrams of Prozac twice a day for regular subscribers, and or
but
the host.
I have to warn you, we are not doctors. And we are not legally allowed to prescribe medications, so please consult your own physician before you take any of our.
Is Andrew? I'm not
just
paying.
Gotta say that.
I'm not paying for Prozac. It was a sugar pill, but.
Oh, okay. Well, never mind. Forget that. Well, no, because remember, even
just
with
got a really
pills,
good fine tip magic marker and right on the side. Pros.
Yeah. Oh, dear
and then
Lord.
on the other side, you got to put not for actual consumption.
Yeah, it tastes suspiciously like a Tic Tac, though.
It's Prozac. It'll make you feel better and make your breath. It'll just like if you got bad breath. Oh my God, this will just cure all that ails you. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Please check us out on the Discord. Commander, did you want to stop by the Discord after the show tonight and hang out a bit, or?
Sure, I'll be there a little while. Sure.
All right. So, Xander, I hope you'll join us. We'll be in the Discord, in the voice chat channel for anyone who wants to join after the show. I've tweaked the ending of tonight's show just a little bit for Humanist Swede and for Sinister Porpoise. I hope they like it. And we will... We're staying on it. We'll see what happens next, but barring any breaking news, we look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you all again for joining us, and thank you, Commander McMillan. Thank you, Isandering, and we will see you guys next time. Have a good evening.
And war